The mare was finished, and Isadora Moreno knew it. She felt the last of the horse's strength shudder and give out, the lather on its flanks gone dry and crusty, the head dropping low with every step. The town was just ahead, a collection of adobe failures and raw lumber promises huddled against the Arizona border, shimmering in the late afternoon heat. Weeks in the desert, running hard, had worn them both down to bone and nerve. "Just a little more," she whispered, her own voice a dry rasp. She slid off the horse, her boots hitting the thick dust of the main street. Her legs trembled. Hunger was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She was coated in grit, her black hair matted, her face burned by the sun until the lighter skin of her mixed blood was almost as dark as the Mexican side her mother had given her. She was a ghost walking into a town that hated ghosts. Men stopped what they were doing on the boardwalk, their eyes lingering. She was used to the looks. Men always looked, first with curiosity, then with contempt when they saw the defiance in her, the refusal to be categorized, to be tamed. She pulled her hat low and led the mare to the livery, the jingle of her last few coins heavy in her pocket. The liveryman spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed inches from her boot. "That's a hard-ridden animal, girl." "She'll live," Izzy said. "Grain and water. Rub her down. Costs 4 bits. She dug the coins out and slapped them into his hand, her eyes daring him to say more. He just grunted and took the reins. She needed food, water, and most of all, money. The only place for that was the saloon. It was called the Dusty Ace. It smelled of stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the cheap perfume of the 2 women working the bar. It went quiet when she walked in. She ignored them all, walking straight to a back table where 4 men were playing cards. They looked up, surprised. "Room for one more?" Izzy asked, her hand resting near the worn grip of the pistol on her hip. One of them, a thick-bodied man with a stained mustache and a silver buckle, grinned. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. Sit down. Sweetheart, your money's good here, long as you got any." "I've got enough," she said. She bought in for $3. She played quiet, her face giving away nothing. She nursed a single whiskey, letting the burn settle her nerves. She watched their hands, their eyes, the way they held their cards. She knew men like this. They played loud, they blustered, and they thought she was just another dirty half-breed girl, easy to roll or easy to scare. Her mother, before a bullet in a saloon just like this one had ended her, had taught her 2 things: how to shoot straight and how to read men's weaknesses. An hour passed. Izzy's small pile of chips had grown. The man with the silver buckle, a rancher named Brandt, was losing heavily, and his good humor had soured. The pot grew. It was down to just her and Brandt. The air was thick. He laid his cards down with a slam. "Full house, aces high, read 'em and weep, girly." Izzy slowly spread her hand. 4 queens. A dead silence fell over the table. Brandt's face, already flushed with whiskey, turned a deep, ugly purple. "You cheated," he snarled. Izzy didn't move. "I played the cards I was dealt. No half-breed whore takes my money by cheating." He lunged across the table, overturning it. Cards, chips, and whiskey glasses crashed to the floor. "You're gonna give that back." Izzy was already on her feet, backing away. The saloon owner shouted, "Take it outside! Brandt, not in here!" Brandt smiled, a wet, ugly twisting of his lips. "Gladly." Izzy knew better than to stick around. She moved toward the back door, the one that led to the alley. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted the money she'd won. She was halfway down the dark alley, the sounds of the saloon fading, when his hand clamped down on her arm, spinning her around and slamming her against the adobe wall. The impact drove the air from her lungs. "You think you can just walk away?" he breathed. The stench of whiskey and rage washed over her. "I won the game." She spat, trying to twist free. "You're gonna pay me back," he growled, his other hand fumbling with his belt. "One way or another." He tried to force himself on her, his weight crushing her. Izzy felt the old, familiar terror rise, cold and sharp, but rage was always stronger. She kneed him hard in the groin. he grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. It was all she needed. Her hand blurred to her belt, pulling the small, reliable pistol she'd carried for 5 years. She didn't aim. She just pushed the barrel against his thick gut and pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening in the narrow alley. It echoed once, twice, and then was gone, swallowed by the night. Brant stared at her, his eyes wide with stupid surprise. He looked down at the dark stain spreading across his shirt. He slid down the wall and fell sideways into the dirt, unmoving. Izzy stood, breathing hard, the gun still hot in her hand. The saloon's back door burst open. The bartender, holding a lantern, stepped out, followed by the other players. The lantern light fell on Izzy, then on Brant's body. "He's dead!" the bartender yelled. "She shot him! She murdered him!" "He tried to rape me," Izzy shouted, her voice shaking. "Liar!" one of the other men yelled. "We seen it! She lured him out here to rob him. We all saw her cheat." It happened fast. The word murder was a spark in the dry tinder of the border town. More men poured out, their faces ugly in the torchlight. "It's that Moreno girl," someone shouted. "The half-breed. She's bad blood. That one. Let's string her up." Hands grabbed her. They ripped the pistol from her grasp. She fought, kicking, biting, screaming. But there were too many. They dragged her out of the alley and into the main street. A crowd had formed, drawn by the shot and the shouting. "Get a rope! Hang the greaser bitch!" The slurs hit her harder than their fists. They were the same words that had chased her entire life. They dragged her toward the large cottonwood tree at the end of the street. The same tree that had seen other bodies, dark-skinned bodies, swing in the moonlight. She felt the rough hemp bite into her neck. They threw the end over a high branch. She saw Brant's friends, their faces righteous with false anger and whiskey. She was going to die here, in the dirt, for defending herself against a man who saw her as less than human. The thought filled her with a despair so cold it burned, followed by a surge of pure, uncut rage. No, not like this. They were drunk. They were clumsy. As they hauled her up, her feet leaving the ground, she twisted, her hand fumbling for the small skinning knife she always kept tucked in her left boot. Her fingers closed around the handle. They were shouting, pulling, her vision starting to speckle. She slashed upward, cutting the rope holding her wrists. Her hands were free. She grabbed the taut rope around her neck, giving herself slack, and slashed at it. The blade was sharp. It bit deep. She fell, landing hard on her shoulder. "She's loose!" A shot rang out, then another. A bullet burned a hot line of fire along her ribs. She ignored the pain. She scrambled to her feet and ran. Zigzagging through the chaos, she ran for the livery, for her horse. Another shot kicked up dust at her feet. She burst into the dark, hay-smelling barn. Her mare was in the first stall. She didn't bother with the saddle. She ripped the reins from the post, slashed the stall rope, and threw herself onto the horse's bare back. She kicked the mare's flanks, bursting out of the livery doors just as the mob rounded the corner. She galloped down the dark street and into the desert, the shouts and gunfire fading behind her. She didn't look back. She rode south, deep into Apache territory, where she knew the law wouldn't follow. The land was harsh, unforgiving. She rode until the moon was high, until the lights of the town were long gone. The wound in her side was a dull, throbbing fire. The rope burn on her neck was raw. She pushed the mare for 2 full days, living on nothing but fear and momentum. The horse was dying beneath her, but it kept going, loyal to the last. On the 3rd morning, the mare stumbled in the high, rocky scrubland. It went to its knees and did not get up. Izzy slid off, her own strength gone. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the horse. She stroked its neck, then took her pistol and ended its suffering. The sound of the shot was small in the vast, empty land. She was alone, wounded. No water. She started walking. The sun was a hammer. The world turned into a swimming blur of heat and red rock. She didn't know how long she walked. Hours. A day. She saw shapes in the distance. Mesas rising like flat-topped gods against the blue. blue sky. Her legs gave out. She fell, rolling into a shallow, sandy arroyo. The sand was cool against her fevered cheek. She thought of her mother, of the blood on the saloon floor. Then the world went black. Cross Lone Tree saw the buzzards circling late in the day. He'd been tracking a mountain lion that had been getting too bold, too close to his small, hidden ranch. He figured the lion had made a kill, or maybe a stray calf had broken its leg. He rode his tall roan gelding up the rise, his rifle resting easy across his lap. He saw the dead horse first, a good mare, run to death. He scanned the area, his eyes missing nothing. Then he saw the drag marks into the dry wash. He dismounted, moving with a silence that was more animal than man. He found her at the bottom. He wasn't sure what she was at first, just a heap of dirty rags and black hair. He knelt, his face impassive. He saw the rope burn, angry and purple, circling her throat. He saw the dried blood caked on her shift, where a bullet had grazed her. He debated. He had carved out a life here, far from the white world that hated him for his Apache blood, and far from the Apache tribes that distrusted him for his white blood. This woman was trouble, the kind of trouble that brought pauses, and questions, and violence. His solitary life depended on no one knowing he was here. He should leave her. It was the desert's way. He brushed the matted hair from her face, even unconscious. Her features were set in a mask of defiance. She wasn't broken. She was just stopped. Something in him, a quiet, buried part of himself, recognized it. He understood it. With a low sigh, he bent and lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. He draped her over the front of his saddle and began the slow ride back to his ranch. His place was tucked into a deep fold of the sandstone cliffs, invisible from any distance. A small, sturdy cabin he had built with his own hands, a small barn, and a spring-fed cistern. It was a fortress of solitude. He carried her inside and laid her on his own cot. Izzy woke to the smell of wood smoke, sage, and something else, something clean. The light was dim, filtered through a single, clean window. She was in a bed, not on the sand. The fever was still on her, making the world swim, but the edge of it was dull. She saw him. He was sitting in a chair across the small, one-room cabin, sharpening a knife. The sound was a steady, rhythmic scrape. She tried to sit up, but her body screamed in protest. Her side was tightly bound. Her throat ached. Her guns were gone. "Where am I?" Her voice was a croak. He didn't look up from the whetstone. "My place." His voice was low, with a stillness that matched the landscape. "My horse." It wasn't a question. "Dead. My guns. By the door. Cleaned." She saw them, her belt and holster hanging on a peg, too far to reach. "Who are you?" He stopped sharpening. He lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes were dark, unsettling. They saw everything. He was half Apache, she could see that, but there was something of the white world in the set of his jaw. "Cross Lone Tree. You brought me here." "I did." "Why?" He went back to the knife. "You weren't dead yet." He brought her water in a tin cup. He brought her a thin broth that smelled of rabbit and herbs. He moved with an economy of motion, wasting nothing. He unbound her side. The wound was clean, stitched with horsehair. He had applied a dark, cooling poultice of chewed herbs. He worked gently, his hands sure and impersonal. He never asked what happened. He never asked where she came from. He never asked about the raw, seeping burn on her neck. She watched him, her suspicion a tangible thing. Men were not quiet. Men were not kind without wanting a price. She had learned that lesson at her mother's knee. "I don't need your help," she finally rasped, pushing the cup of water away. "You'll be dead by morning without it," he replied, his tone flat. He pushed the cup back. "Drink." She drank, but she refused to thank him. Gratitude was a chain, a debt, and she would not be indebted to any man. Days passed. The fever broke. Her strength returned slowly, like water seeping back into a dry creek bed. She watched him. His routines were simple, unchanging. He rose before dawn, made coffee so black and bitter it stung. and went out. He mended tack. He worked his horse. He chopped wood. He seemed to be a man who had forgotten how to speak, or perhaps had just decided it was no longer necessary. He ate his own meals standing by the hearth, usually jerky and cold beans. He never sat at the small table. He left the cot for her, sleeping himself on a bedroll near the door, a rifle always within reach. He kept his distance, and his silence was a wall. She hated it. The quiet unnerved her. The absence of a threat, of the constant calculating gaze of men, made her skin crawl. It was a peace she didn't trust. On the 5th day, the sky turned a sickly yellow. Cross came in from the corral, his face grim. He began shuttering the single window. "What is it?" "Dust storm," he said. "A bad one." It hit the cabin like a solid wall. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed, a high, thin sound that vibrated in her bones. The world outside the cabin vanished into a roaring, suffocating cloud of red dust. Darkness fell at 3 in the afternoon. For 3 days, they were prisoners in the one-room cabin. The space, which had seemed manageable, shrank. The air grew thick, hot. The fine silt pushed its way under the door, through the cracks in the walls. It coated the floor, the table, her blankets. It got in her teeth, in her hair. The constant, deafening sound of the wind erased all other noise. They were trapped in a loud silence. On the 2nd day, she was strong enough to make the coffee herself. Her hands, still unsteady from the fever, trembled as she poured the boiling water from the kettle into the tin mug. The mug started to slip. His hand closed over hers, steadying it. She froze. His skin was rough, warm, and covered hers completely. He didn't let go, just held her hand firm until the cup was full and stable. His touch was brief, impersonal, and yet it sent a jolt through her body. She snatched her hand back. "I can do it." "I know," he said, turning back to the fire. That night, the fire was the only light against the roaring dark. He was mending a bridle strap, his fingers working the leather with practiced skill. She was sitting on the cot, cleaning her pistol, the familiar weight and smell of the oil a comfort. She watched him. He wasn't like the men in the town. He wasn't like Brant. He wasn't like any man she'd ever known. He was contained. He was still and as dangerous as the desert itself. The storm broke on the 4th morning. The silence that fell was absolute, heavier than the wind had been. The air outside was scoured clean, the light sharp and new. Izzy stood in the open doorway, breathing in the fresh, damp air. She felt something inside her, a softening, a loosening of the knot of fear and rage she'd carried for as long as she could remember. She hated the feeling. It was weakness. She turned to him. He was sweeping the fine layer of red dust from the floor. "I'll be leaving," she said, her voice stronger now. "Soon as I'm ready to ride." He nodded once, not looking up. "There's a spare horse in the corral. You can take it." She waited, but he said nothing more. She had to draw the line. She had to make it clear. "I don't belong to anyone," she said, her voice hard. "Never have, never will." He stopped sweeping. He rested his hands on the broom handle and looked at her. His dark eyes held hers, not with pity or anger or desire, but with a simple, unnerving understanding. He considered her words, as if they were stones he was weighing in his hand. Then he said, "I don't want to own you." Her breath caught in her throat. It was the last thing she expected him to say. It was the one answer she had no defense for. It disarmed her more completely than any threat could have. That night, she couldn't take the cot. It felt too much like his, too much like a debt. "I'll sleep by the fire," she announced, grabbing one of the spare blankets. He didn't argue. He just nodded, taking the bedroll she had been using and spreading it on the cot for himself. They lay in the dark, the fire crackling between them. They were back to back, separated by 6 feet of wooden floor, but the small cabin was alive with their awareness of each other. She could hear the quiet, steady rhythm of his breathing. She knew he was not asleep, and he knew she was not either. The air was thick with things not said, with a heat that had nothing to do with the dying embers in the hearth. Izzy did not heal tamely. She healed with a restless, angry energy that had nowhere to go. The bullet wound in her side pulled and ached, and the rope burn on her neck was a constant, fiery reminder. But she refused to lie on the cot like an invalid. She was a guest by force of circumstance, but she would not be a burden. She started with the horse. The spare gelding in the corral was a sturdy bay, but his coat was dull and his manners lazy. She spent hours brushing him, talking to him in a low, harsh Spanish her mother had used, her words a mix of curses and commands. She found Cross's mending kit and began repairing the bridle, her stitches small and tight, a mirror of the tension in her own body. She hauled water from the spring-fed cistern, bucket by bucket, her teeth gritted against the pull in her side. When Cross saw her, he stopped. "That's my work. I'm not crippled," she snapped, sloshing water over the rim. He didn't argue. He just watched her for a moment, then went back to splitting wood. He let her work. He let her fight her way back to strength. A new rhythm settled over the hidden ranch. It was a rhythm built on shared labor, not shared words. They were two solitary animals occupying the same small territory. She would wake to the smell of his coffee, dress, and be outside by the time the sun was a red slit on the horizon. They moved around each other with a wary grace. She would clean the cabin while he was out, and he would leave a piece of jerky or a roasted rabbit by the hearth for her. The land was a hard teacher, but he knew its language. He took her out one afternoon, away from the cliffs, into the high chaparral. He carried 2 steel traps. "You need to know this," he said. It wasn't a request. He showed her how to find the faint game trails, how to read the press of a coyote's paw in the dust. He showed her how to handle the trap, his strong, scarred hands moving with precision as he set the spring and concealed it beneath a whisper of sand and leaves. He showed her how to use a scent lure, a foul-smelling concoction of his own making. "You check them at sunrise," he said. "Never later. The sun spoils the fur." The next morning, they rode out. The first trap was empty. The second held a large, pale-furred coyote, its leg broken, its eyes wild with hate and pain. Izzy drew her knife. Cross put a hand on her arm. "No, the pelt!" He dispatched the animal with a single, economical blow to the head. Then, he laid it out and began to skin it. He showed her how to make the first cuts, how to work the blade under the hide without nicking the fur or the flesh. His hands were covered in blood, but his movements were clean, respectful. He handed her the knife. "Your turn." She took it. She finished the job. The work was grim, but it was real. It was survival. As they rode back, the fresh pelt tied behind his saddle, she felt a strange, hard respect settle in her. This was a bond that had nothing to do with kindness. It was built on the shared, bloody understanding of what it took to stay alive in a land that wanted you dead. The days grew hotter. The sun beat down on the sandstone cliffs until the air itself seemed to vibrate. The creek, fed by the high mountain spring, was the only cool place. It ran through a narrow cut in the rock about a mile from the cabin, hidden by willows and sycamores. Izzy had gone there to wash, to scrub the grime and the memory of the town from her skin. Cross was meant to be checking the southern perimeter. She thought she was alone. She was waist-deep in the cold, clear water, her back to the bank, when a sound, the snap of a dry twig, made her freeze. She turned slowly. He was standing on the bank, not 20 feet away, half hidden by the willow branches. He was holding his rifle. He hadn't been hunting. He had been watching. His face was unreadable, but his stillness was absolute. She saw the exact moment he registered that she had seen him. He didn't flinch, didn't stammer an apology, didn't leer. He just stopped, and then, slowly, he began to turn away. A quiet, deliberate motion that was more respectful than any words. But the shame of being caught, or perhaps the shame of turning away, wasn't what she saw in his eyes. It was something else, a raw, unguarded hunger that he had kept hidden behind his wall of silence. It was the same need she had seen in Brant, in all of them. But in Cross, it was chained. A familiar, bitter rage rose in her. He was just like the rest. He would take. "You like what you see?" she called out, her voice sharp and mocking. He stopped turning. He faced her, but he kept his eyes lowered, fixed on the stream at his feet. "I'll leave you be." "No," she said. The challenge was in her now, hot and reckless. She was tired of being watched, tired of being wanted, tired of being a thing to be taken. She rose from the water. She walked straight out of the creek, the water sluicing from her body, her skin pale against the dark rocks. She didn't cover herself. She walked up the bank until she was standing directly in front of him, close enough to touch. The afternoon sun hit her, droplets glistening on her shoulders, on the curve of her hip, on the angry red line of the rope burn on her neck. She tilted her chin up, meeting his gaze. He was finally looking at her, his dark eyes tracing her features, her throat, the wound on her side. He looked, but he did not move. His hands remained loose, one on his rifle, the other at his side. "This is what you want, isn't it?" she demanded, her voice low. "This is what they all want. Does this tame you?" She expected him to grab her. She expected him to justify himself. She expected him to run. He did none of those things. He just looked at her, and the hunger in his eyes was eclipsed by something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. His jaw was tight. He seemed to be holding his breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was a rasp, rougher than she had ever heard it. "No," he said. He lifted his hand, slowly, as if it were incredibly heavy. He didn't touch her skin. He let his fingers hover an inch from her throat, his thumb tracing the shadow of the rope burn. "It chains me." He dropped his hand and turned, walking back into the trees without another word, leaving her naked and trembling with an emotion she could not name. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was no longer a wall between them. It was a wire, pulled taut, vibrating with everything that had happened at the creek. She did not take the bedroll. He did not take the cot. They ate their meal of cold beans and rabbit in silence, on opposite sides of the room. When the fire burned down to embers, she went to her bedroll by the hearth. He remained at the table, cleaning his rifle, the oiled rag making a soft, repetitive sound. She couldn't sleep. She was too aware of him. She could feel his presence in the dark like a physical weight. Finally, she heard the click of the rifle mechanism, the snap of the oilcloth case. She heard his boots on the floorboards. He was not going to the cot. He was coming to her. She tensed, her hand moving to the knife she now kept beside her. He stopped, standing over her. She could just make out his silhouette against the faint orange glow of the embers. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. His voice was strained. "Why?" she whispered. He didn't answer, but she knew. It was the same need that was coiling in her own stomach, a desperate, lonely ache that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the fact that they were both alive. "Don't," she said. He knelt, and then he was beside her on the narrow bedroll. There were no words. There was no tenderness. His hands were rough. His mouth was hard. He pulled her shift up, his fingers digging into her hips. This was not a slow seduction. It was a collision. It was rough, as she had always known it would be. It was desperate, a raw clawing for contact, for proof of life. And it was silent, save for the rasp of their breath and the rustle of the blanket. He moved against her, and she met his force with her own, her nails digging into his back. This was a language she understood. It was a fight for control, for release. It was two people pushed to the very edge of solitude, crashing into each other because there was nowhere else to go. It was over quickly, a shuddering, violent release that left them both breathless and slick with sweat. He rolled off her immediately, turning his back. The silence that fell was heavy, absolute. Izzy lay on her back, staring up at the dark rafters, her body aching, her mind hollow. She waited for the familiar disgust, the self-loathing that always followed, but it didn't come. Instead, she felt something else, a strange, unfamiliar shift deep in her chest, like ice breaking up in a frozen river. It was a hollow, aching loneliness that was suddenly, terrifyingly, filled. Cross did not move. He lay rigid, his breathing harsh. After a long time, he stood up. He grabbed his rifle, pulled on his boots, and walked out of the cabin, shutting the door quietly behind him. He did not come back all night. Izzy did not sleep. She watched the gray light of dawn seep into the cabin, and for the first time in her life, she felt the cold sting of tears behind her eyes. She hated it. He returned just after sunrise, his face shadowed with stubble, his eyes weary. He said nothing. He walked to the hearth, stoked the fire, and began to make coffee. Just as he did every morning. They didn't speak of it. They went back to their chores, but the wire was still there. It had not been broken. It had been fused. A week later, the sound of a wagon bell broke the stillness. Izzy, who was in the corral, instantly drew her pistol. Cross came to the cabin door. "It's all right. It's just Jed, the trader." A mule-drawn wagon, piled high with crates and barrels, rattled into the clearing. The man driving it was small and wiry, with a beard that reached his chest and eyes that missed nothing. "Cross, you son of a gun!" The man, Jedediah, called out. "Thought that lion might have got you for sure this time." "You, not yet, Jed," Cross said. He helped the man unhitch, his movements calm. Izzy stayed by the corral, her hand still on her gun, watching. Jed's eyes found her. They widened for a second, taking in her dark hair, her mixed blood features, and the pistol she held like it was part of her arm. He looked from her to Cross, and a slow, knowing grin spread across his face. He spat a stream of tobacco. "Well, now, solitude ain't what it used to be. I see. She's just passing through," Cross said, his voice flat. "Uh-huh." Cross carried a heavy bundle of cured pelts, the coyotes, a wolf, and several rabbits, and traded them for coffee, salt, flour, and a box of cartridges. As Jed loaded the furs, he spoke to Cross in a low voice, but Izzy's hearing was sharp. "You'd best be careful, son," Jed said, not looking at her. "There's new paper up in Tucson, $500 for a half-breed girl. Wanted for murder back on the border. Shot a rancher named Brant in the back, they say." Izzy's blood went cold. "Description matches," Jed continued. "Tying down the tarp. Dark hair, mean as a snake, rides like a man. Name of Isadora Moreno." Cross was perfectly still. "Is that so?" "It is. And Brant's brother has hired bounty men. They ain't particular about bringing her in alive. Especially since she's got Mexican blood. They'd just as soon collect the money and leave the body for the buzzards." Jed finally looked at Cross. "Your guest fits the bill. Cross, this ain't my business, but you've been a good customer. That kind of money brings the worst kind of men. And they'll tear this place apart to find her." Cross nodded once. "I'll remember it. You do that." Jed climbed onto his wagon. "See you in the spring, if you're still here." He tipped his hat toward Izzy, his expression now wary, and cracked his whip over the mules. The wagon rattled away, the sound of the bell fading until there was only silence. The silence was worse than the windstorm. Izzy finally holstered her pistol. She walked over to him. He was staring at the keg of flour, his back to her. "It's true," she said. He didn't turn. "They lied," she said, her voice hard, rattling with the old rage. "He wasn't shot in the back. I shot him in the gut, right in front of me. He was trying to—" She stopped. She wouldn't make excuses. "He put his hands on me, so I killed him." She waited for the judgment. She waited for him to tell her to take the horse and go. She waited for the fear, the disgust. He turned around slowly. His dark eyes were unreadable. He looked at the rope burn on her neck, which was now a faded, puckered scar. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and she felt stripped bare, more naked than she had been at the creek. He didn't ask if it was self-defense. He didn't ask for details. He only asked one question. Did he deserve it? The question hung in the dry air. It was not about law. It was not about sin. It was about justice. A lifetime of men like Brant, of men who looked and took and spat, flashed behind her eyes. Her mother's body on a dirty floor. The liveryman spat. The shouts of half-breed as they dragged her to the tree. "They all did," she whispered. Cross held her gaze for a long time. Then he nodded, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. He picked up the keg of flour. "We'll need more meat before winter," he said, and walked into the cabin. That night, the tension was gone. The wall was gone. The desperate animal need was gone. They lay on their separate bedrolls, but the space between them was no longer an emptiness. It was a shared quiet. "They'll come here," she said into the darkness. "The traitor, he'll talk. Maybe, maybe not. He values my business. You should make me leave. I bring death. Cross, I told you. Men who get near me end up dead." "I'm not dead," he said simply. She was quiet for a long time. "Why did you stay? Why live out here? Alone?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was low, dredging up things he had buried deep. "My mother was white," he said, "from back east. She came out here to teach, fell in with my father. He was Apache, Chiricahua." He paused, and Izzy could hear the past in his voice. "The white folks in town. They called her a squaw lover, called me a breed. My father's people. They didn't trust her. They didn't trust me. We were ghosts. We didn't belong anywhere." "What happened to them?" Izzy asked, her voice soft. "My mother, she got sick, the fever. The town doctor wouldn't come out. The army doctor at the fort wouldn't treat an Apache's family. She died. I was 10, maybe. My father, he took it hard. He took me high into the mountains, taught me the old ways. He tried to make me one of them. But my skin wasn't dark enough. My eyes weren't right. Then the cavalry came. A peace talk. It was a trap. They shot him while he was walking to their flag. They said he was resisting. He fell silent. The fire crackled. A small, lonely sound. I hid," Cross continued, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I hid in the white world, working ranches, got spit on. I hid with the Apache, got treated like a dog. There's no place for half-bloods. Girl, this place is the only place no one comes. The only place I'm not half of something. I'm just here." Izzy felt that shift in her chest again, that painful cracking. He was her, she was him, two halves of different things, making one whole. "Nothing." She got up from her bedroll. He tensed. She didn't go to him. She went to the door and looked out at the brilliant, cold stars. "Come on," she said. He followed her. She saddled the bay. He saddled his roan. They rode out of the canyon, not speaking, climbing the winding trail up to the top of the mesa. They stopped at the ridge. The world fell away below them, a vast silver ocean of desert and rock, all of it sleeping under a blanket of stars so thick it looked like spilled salt. The air was cold, clean. They sat on their horses side by side, looking out at the impossible emptiness. "It's so quiet," she whispered. "It's always quiet." She looked at him, at his hard profile against the starlight, the set of his jaw, the deep solitude in his eyes. "Have you ever felt truly free, Cross?" she asked. "Not just alone, but free?" He didn't look at the horizon. He didn't look at the stars. He turned his head and looked directly at her. His eyes, even in the dark, seemed to burn. He held her gaze, and she saw the man from the creek, the man at the door, the man who had shared his past. "Now," he said. Her breath hitched. She wanted to look away. She wanted to deny it, to shatter the moment with a hard word. But she couldn't. She just sat there, frozen, her heart pounding a slow, heavy beat, and she didn't look away. They rode back from the ridge as the sun was climbing, painting the eastern sky in shades of pale rose and apricot. The night on the mesa had left a silence between them, but it was no longer the heavy, suspicious quiet of their first days. It was a shared space, fragile as a spider's web, a thing they were both afraid to break. That one word, "now," hung in the air, meaning everything and nothing. They were a mile from the canyon mouth when Cross reined in his roan, his head lifting, sniffing the air. "What is it?" Izzy asked, pulling her bay up beside him. "Smoke," he said. His voice was flat, but a new tension radiated from him. "And not from my chimney." He urged his horse into a canter, and she followed, her heart suddenly a cold stone in her chest. They rounded the last bend, the one that opened into the hidden fold of sandstone. The barn was gone. It was not just damaged. It was a pile of blackened, smoking timbers. The roof caved in, the new wood they had hauled and cut now just a heap of gray ash. The smell of burned hay and charred wood was thick, acrid. Cross slid from his saddle before the horse had even stopped. He walked toward the wreckage, his face a mask of stone. The air was still, the only sound the hiss of a few dying embers. He knelt, touching the end of a beam that was still hot. Izzy dismounted, her legs shaking. "Jed," she whispered. "The traitor." He had talked. The $500 reward had loosened his tongue. The bounty hunters had come. "They missed the cabin," she said, stating the obvious, her voice sounding hollow. "They weren't aiming for the cabin," Cross said. He stood up, pointing to the ground near the ashes. Boot prints. 3, maybe 4 different sets. They had come, seen the horses in the barn, and figured their quarry was inside, or, finding it empty, they had left a message. "We were here. We'll be back." Izzy backed away, her hands rising to her mouth. This was her fault. The peace he had built here, the solitude he had carved out of a world that hated him. She had destroyed it. She had brought the fire, the hunt, the death. "I told you," she said, her voice a dry rasp, thick with self-loathing. "I told you I bring death. He's dead, the one in town. And now this, they'll kill you, Cross, just for knowing me." She turned, stumbling toward her horse. Her movements were frantic, desperate. She grabbed the reins, her hands fumbling with the knot. She had to leave. She had to run, to draw the scent of death away from him. "Izzy." She ignored him, yanking the reins free. "They'll be back. They'll kill you and not even think twice about it. A half-breed protecting a wanted murderer. They'll laugh while they do it." She tried to swing into the saddle, but he was there. He didn't grab her. He just put his hand on the saddle horn, blocking her, a solid, unmoving presence. "And where will you go?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it cut through her panic. "Back to the desert, to die, back to another town, for another man like Brant." "It doesn't matter," she cried, turning on him. "Anywhere but here. I'm poison, don't you understand? Everyone, everyone, my mother." She choked on the words. "They burned my barn," he said, his voice still low, but with an edge like newly chipped flint. "They left their boot prints on my land. They put their filth on my home." He looked at her, and his dark eyes were not full of fear or blame. They were burning with a cold, contained rage that startled her into silence. "This isn't your fight anymore, Izzy," he said. "It's ours." He took her arm. His grip was firm, not gentle but not rough. It was a grip that claimed, "You're not going anywhere, not unless I'm going with you." The words struck her dumb. She stared at him, at this man who was half wild, half ghost, a man who had more reason to run than she did. He was not pushing her away. He was lashing her to him. The fight drained out of her, leaving a terrifying, hollow vulnerability. She had never had anyone stand with her. She had never had an hour's. She sagged against the horse, her forehead resting on the worn leather of the saddle. He did not let go of her arm. They did not talk about it again. They turned to the work. The cabin was safe, but the horses had no shelter, and the nights were already growing colder. Winter came early in the high desert. They began to rebuild. It was slow work, wordless work. They had no new lumber. They had to ride high up the mesa, to a stand of piñon pine Cross knew. They spent 2 days felling trees with a single axe and a 2-man buck saw. The pull and push of the saw was a new rhythm, a new conversation. His strength, her endurance. Back and forth, sawdust flying, their breath pluming in the cold morning air. They hauled the logs down, one by one, using the horses. They were too heavy. They had to cut them smaller. It took a week just to get the raw materials. The intimacy that grew between them was not the desperate, silent crash of their first night. It was not the fragile, starlit confession on the ridge. It was forged in sweat and sawdust and shared exhaustion. It was in the way he anticipated her movement, stepping aside as she swung the axe. It was in the way she learned to read his grunts, knowing when he needed her to take more weight as they lifted a beam. They ate, standing up, sharing a pot of beans, too tired to speak. They collapsed by the fire, the smell of pine sap and sweat mingling between them. She had her bedroll. He had his, but the space between them shrank. One night, a cold wind swept down from the cliffs. Izzy woke, shivering, and moved her blankets closer to the hearth. The next night, when she unrolled her bed, she found he had already laid his own bedroll out, right next to hers, not touching, just near. She lay down, her back to him. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, a solid, living presence in the dark. She did not feel fear. She did not feel desire. She felt anchored. But safety was a dangerous thing. It let the old ghosts in. She was back in the saloon, not the one on the border, but one from years ago. A man with a cigar and a greasy vest was holding her chin, his thumb rubbing her lip. "How much for the girl?" he was asking her mother. "She's got spirit. I like that." And her mother, her beautiful, broken mother, was smiling a terrible, painted smile. Then the room exploded. Gunfire. The man with the cigar was gone, and her mother was on the floor, the red embroidery on her dress disappearing into the widening red stain on the floorboards. She was reaching for Izzy, her mouth open in a silent scream. "No!" Izzy woke up, shouting, lashing out with her knife, which she now slept with in her hand. A hand clamped down on her wrist, steel strong. "Izzy, it's me!" She blinked, the nightmare fading, the dark, cramped cabin coming into focus. Cross was kneeling over her, his face inches from hers, his hair unbound. He had her wrist in one hand. His other hand was on her shoulder. He was breathing hard. He had been on his bedroll, but he had moved in an instant. "It's me," he said again, his voice low, firm. She saw him. The dream shattered. The terror remained, a cold, slick residue. She dropped the knife, and then the thing she had held back for a lifetime, the thing that Brant, the rope, the desert, and the fire could not break. It broke. A sob tore out of her throat, a dry, ragged sound. She collapsed back onto the blanket, and the tears came, hot and stinging. She hated them. She hated the weakness. She tried to turn away from him, to hide her face. He did not let her. He did not soothe her with kind words. He did not tell her it was all right. He simply moved, sitting beside her, and pulled her against him. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight, his hand pressing the back of her head against his chest. He held her like a man holding on in a storm. She fought him for a second, her fists beating uselessly against his ribs, but he just held on tighter. She gave up. She buried her face in his shirt, which smelled of smoke and pine, and she cried. She cried for her mother, for the girl in the saloon, for the woman with the rope around her neck. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but a raw, aching hollow. He never spoke. He just held her. He held her until the shaking stopped. He held her until her breathing grew even. And then he just held her. She fell asleep, not in her bedroll, but in his arms, her cheek against the steady, solid beat of his heart. The next morning, she was mortified. She was angry at him for seeing her break, angry at herself for breaking. She was silent, harsh, slamming the pots as she made coffee. He watched her, his expression unreadable. He let her be angry. When she was done, he said, "Saddle the horses, both of them. There's a place I need to show you." "I have work to do," she snapped. "The work can wait. Come." He led her high up the side of the mesa, far above the ranch, to a place where the sandstone was split, A narrow fissure hidden by overgrown scrub oak. She would never have found it. He pushed aside the branches. "Bring the lantern," he said. She followed him into the dark. It was a cave, but not a den. The air was cool, still, and dry. It smelled of dust and something ancient. He lit the lantern he kept stashed inside, and as the yellow light grew, it illuminated the walls. Izzy's breath caught. The walls were covered in paintings, red and yellow ochre, figures of deer, of bison, of men with horns, and handprints. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, reaching up into the darkness. They were stenciled, they were pressed, they were the marks of generations. "My father brought me here," Cross said. His voice was different. It was softer, filled with a reverence she had never heard. "This is from the old ones, before my people, before any people we know." He walked deeper inside, holding the lantern high. "When the white men called me a breed, and the Apache called me a ghost, when I was nothing, I would come here." He stopped, touching the cold stone wall. He spread his own hand over one of the ancient prints, his fingers fitting perfectly over the faded outline. "This is where I remember who I am," he said. "That I am part of something. That I am from here." Izzy was silent. This was a trust beyond words. He had shared his past. He had shared his body. But this was his soul. He was showing her the one place in the world he was not an outcast. She walked to the wall, her fingers tracing the outline of a small handprint, perhaps a child's. She looked around and saw a small, shallow bowl carved into the rock, a bit of dried red pigment still inside. She looked at him. He watched her, his face calm in the lantern light. He nodded. Once, Izzy dipped her fingers into her canteen, letting a few drops of precious water fall into the bowl. She stirred the red ochre with her finger, making a thick, cold paste. She took a breath, then smeared the pigment over her left palm. She looked at the wall, at the empty space beside the handprint Cross had touched. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached up and pressed her hand flat against the ancient, living stone. She held it there for a long moment, feeling the cold seep into her skin. When she pulled her hand away, a perfect, dark red print remained, a new mark, beside the old. She was not just a ghost. Running, she was here. They sat in the cave for a long time, the silence peaceful. "We can't stay," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "They'll be back, a real posse this time, not just bounty men. And winter is almost here." "Where would we go?" she asked. "New Mexico," he suggested. "The mountains are high, easy to get lost." "California," she countered, the word tasting strange. "I heard you can see the ocean. They say it's so big, it washes everything clean." They were just words, dreams whispered in a secret place, but they were we words. Our dreams. That night, back in the cabin, the rebuilt horse shelter standing dark against the cliffs. She watched him by the fire. He was not mending tack. He was working on something small. He had taken a long lock of hair from his roan's tail, and another from her bay. He was braiding them together, thin and strong, weaving them into a strip of soft, dark leather he'd cut from his own saddlebags. When he was finished, he didn't make a speech. He just held it out to her. It was a bracelet, simple, tough, and beautiful. She took it. It was a promise. It was a chain. She looked at him, and he looked back, his eyes clear. He was not asking her to be tamed. He was asking to be tied. She did not put it on her wrist, where the world could see it. She sat by the fire, pulled off her right boot, and tied the braided leather bracelet around her ankle. It was warm from his hands. She tucked it beneath her trousers, a secret shackle, a quiet weight that anchored her to the earth. They needed supplies. The bounty hunters had scattered their flour, and they were low on salt and cartridges. The new barn was built, but they couldn't last the winter. They couldn't go back to Jed's route. "There's a mining post," Cross said. 2 days' ride east. They don't get much news. We can trade for what we need." They rode in 2 days later, not as lovers, but as partners, wary, quiet, hats pulled low. Izzy had cut her hair shorter with her skinning knife, tucking it up under her hat. She looked like a slender, half-grown boy. The town was just one dusty street, a general store, a smithy, and 3 saloons. They tied their horses in front of the store. "I'll talk," Cross said. "You watch." They went inside. The store smelled of axle grease, coffee beans, and dried apples. A bored-looking clerk sat on a stool. Cross began a bargain, his voice a low monotone. "Need flour, 50 pounds, and salt, cartridges, 45.70. Izzy stood by the door, her hand resting near her hip. She scanned the room. A few miners, an old woman, and a man. He was tall, wearing a long gray duster despite the warmth inside. He was drinking from a tin mug of coffee near the ammunition counter. He had the dead-eyed stillness of a man who waits for a living. He was not a local. He glanced at them, then away. Then his eyes drifted back. He looked at Cross, at his Apache features, his rifle. Then he looked at Izzy. He studied her, his gaze sharp, lingering. He saw the high cheekbones, the dark eyes, the defiant set of her jaw. He saw the way she stood, poised, her hand near her gun. His eyes narrowed. Izzy felt the look like a physical touch, cold and assessing. The man slowly put his mug down on the counter. His hand drifted toward the opening of his duster. "Well now," he said, his voice a low, casual drawl that chilled her blood. "I seen paper on you, girl. Isadora Moreno, $500. You're a long way from the border." The store went silent. The clerk froze. Cross didn't turn. He didn't speak. He dropped the sack of flour he was inspecting and drew his pistol in a single, fluid motion. The bounty hunter was fast. He pulled his own gun and fired. The shot was loud in the small space. A deafening crack. It went wide, splintering the door frame just above Izzy's head. Cross's shot came a second later. It was not wild. It was aimed. It hit the man square in the chest. The bounty hunter looked down, surprised, a dark stain spreading on his duster. He stumbled backward into a barrel of crackers. "Amos!" a voice yelled from the back of the store. A second man, who had been hidden by the shadows, raised a shotgun. Izzy already had her pistol out. She didn't think. She fired, twice. The first shot missed. The second hit the man in the shoulder. He screamed, dropping the shotgun, which went off, blowing a hole in the floor. "Go!" Cross yelled. He grabbed Izzy's arm and hauled her toward the door. The clerk was screaming. People in the street were running for cover. They burst out of the store, and another shot rang out from the saloon across the street. They didn't run to the horses. Cross pulled her into the narrow alley between the store and the smithy. "This way! Now!" They ran, scrambling over a pile of trash and empty crates. A bullet whined off the brick wall behind them. They burst out onto the back street, ran to the end, and cut back to the main road, coming up behind their horses. They untied them, threw themselves into the saddles, and galloped out of town, kicking up a cloud of dust. They didn't look back. They left the flour, the salt, and the cartridges behind. They rode hard for hours, pushing the horses, not stopping until the sun was a red smear in the west and the town was a bad memory 20 miles behind them. They stopped in a deep, rocky canyon, the horses blowing and lathered. The adrenaline was still burning through Izzy's veins. She was shaking. "You killed him," she whispered, staring at him. "He would have killed you," Cross said, his voice rough. He was already out of the saddle, checking his rifle, his movements economical, precise. "And then me." He looked up, his eyes finding hers in the dusk. "You wounded the other one. You shot first." "He had a shotgun," she said, defending herself, though he wasn't accusing her. He nodded. He was right. She was a killer. He was a killer. But the line had been crossed. He had killed for her. "They'll hunt you now, too," she said, the reality of it settling on her like a shroud. "For killing him, a white man, a bounty man, for helping me." "I know," he said. There was nothing else to say. The dream of New Mexico, of California, it was all dust. There was only the two of them, against all of it. The bond was no longer about a choice or a shared past. It was about blood. It was primal. They rode back to the ranch under the cover of darkness, arriving just before dawn. They didn't speak. They both knew what came next. The ranch was compromised. It was the first place the posse would come. It was a trap. They packed what little they had, all the jerky, 2 canteens, their blankets, every last cartridge they owned. Cross stood in the doorway of the small cabin he had built with his own hands. He looked at the hearth. He looked at the cot. This had been his sanctuary, his home. He turned and looked at Izzy, who was standing by the horses, her face pale, her new short hair sticking out from under her hat. She was his sanctuary now. He stepped outside and pulled a match from his shirt pocket. "It's just wood," he said, more to himself than to her. He struck the match on his boot heel. He tossed it onto his cot. The dry blankets caught instantly. He walked to the new raw wood horse shelter, the one they had built together, and did the same, throwing a match into the dry hay. The flames caught fast, licking up the walls, roaring in the pre-dawn quiet. They mounted their horses and sat for a moment, watching their world burn, the fire lighting their faces, erasing them from this place. When the cabin roof began to fall in, Cross turned his roan. He did not look back. Izzy looked at the fire, at the red handprint she knew was blackening on the cave wall high above. Then she turned and followed him. They rode south, away from the towns, away from the law, disappearing together into the vast, unforgiving heart of the desert. The fire was a dwindling orange smear on the horizon. And then it was gone. Behind them, their life, their sanctuary, was a pile of ash. Ahead of them, there was only the desert. Not the high, rocky mesas Cross knew, but the true desert. The parched, flat, waterless expanse that stretched south toward the border. They rode for 2 days, saving the horses, moving only in the gray twilight of dawn and the long, cool shadows of the evening. They hid during the day, finding shallow arroyos or the meager shade of a cluster of mesquite, the sun a white, relentless eye in the sky. They spoke little. There was nothing to say. The world had been burned down to 2 people, 2 horses, and the canteens that were already half empty. Hunger was a constant, dull ache. Thirst was a knife. They shared jerky, chewing the tough, salted meat until their jaws ached. Every sip of water was a calculation. They were shadows, moving through a land of shadows. Every rider they saw in the far distance, a heat-shimmering mirage, was the posse. Every dust devil was a sign of pursuit. The land was empty. It offered nothing, no game, no springs, just rock and sand and thorn. On the 4th day, Cross's roan stumbled. It was favoring its right foreleg. He dismounted, his movement slow with exhaustion. "We have to rest them," he said, his voice a dry croak. They found a small cluster of boulders that offered a sliver of shade. Izzy slumped against the rock, her eyes closed, the world a red, swimming blur behind her eyelids. Cross went to his horse, running his hand down the animal's leg, checking the hoof. "Just dry," he murmured. "He'll be—" The sound was not a sound. It was a feeling, a dry, electric whir that seemed to come from the rock itself. Cross froze. He had been kneeling. He looked down. Slowly, the snake was coiled not 3 feet from his leg, a pale, dusty brown that was the exact color of the earth. A diamondback. It rattled again, a lazy, confident warning. Cross didn't move. He was too tired. His reactions, usually as fast as a striking snake himself, were dulled by the sun and the thirst. "Cross," Izzy whispered, her eyes wide, her hand on her pistol. "Don't," he commanded, his voice low. "Don't shoot. The horses." He tried to shift his weight, to push backward, away from it. It was too late. The snake, sensing the movement, struck. It was impossibly fast. It hit him in the calf, just above his boot. 2 short, sharp stabs of pain. Cross yelled, a raw, guttural sound, and fell back, kicking at the snake. He drew his own pistol and fired. The shot deafening, blowing the snake's head apart. Izzy was at his side in an instant. How bad? He was already pulling up his trouser leg. The 2 punctures were small, dark, and already beginning to swell. An ugly, purplish ring forming around them. "It's bad," he said. His face was gray. It was a big one. It didn't dry bite. She ripped the kerchief from her own neck, her hands shaking. She tied it high on his thigh, twisting it tight with a stick, trying to slow the venom's march. "We have to get you a doctor," he laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "Where? Izzy? There's nothing." He looked at her, his eyes already filming with a strange, distant clarity. "You have to go. Take my rifle. Take the water. Ride south. Don't stop. I'm not leaving you." She spat, her voice thick with a terror she had never felt before. "Don't be a fool. I'm dead. In an hour. I won't be able to walk. By tonight. I'll be... Just go live." "No!" she screamed at him, the word tearing out of her. "You're not dying. I won't let you." She pulled his arm over her shoulders, her small frame straining under his weight. He was already losing feeling in his leg. She dragged him, half carrying him, away from the horses, searching, her eyes frantic. There, in the side of a small hill, was a washout, a shallow cave dug by ancient rains. It was not much, but it was shelter. She got him inside, into the dark, cool-smelling earth. She ran back for the canteens, his rifle, and their bedrolls. She pulled off his boot. The leg was already swelling, the skin turning a tight, mottled purple and black. The poison was moving fast. "Give me your knife," she said. "Izzy, don't. It won't help." "Give it to me." He gave it to her. She looked at the wound. She had seen this once before. A vaquero, bitten. He had died screaming. She took a breath. She pressed the tip of the blade to one of the punctures and sliced, connecting the 2 small holes in a shallow, bloody line. The dark, oily blood welled up. She bent her head, put her mouth to the wound, and sucked, pulling the venom and the poisoned blood out. She spat it onto the cave floor. He cried out, his whole body tensing, as she did it again and again. She worked until her mouth was numb, until the blood was running red and thin. She was desperate. She knew it was probably useless, but it was something. By nightfall, the fever had him. He was burning, his skin dry and hot. He was delirious, muttering in a language she didn't know. Apache words, his father's words. His leg was swollen to twice its normal size, a hard, black, terrifying thing. She sat in the dark, her back against the cave wall, watching him. She had given him the last of their water, forcing it between his cracked lips, but he barely swallowed. This was her fault. Her death, her poison, had finally caught him. She had brought him to this. The man who had saved her, who had held her, who had stood with her. She found herself weeping, not the angry, broken sobs of her nightmare, but silent, hot tears that ran down her dusty face. She was not crying for herself. She was crying for him. She had been alone her entire life, and she had thought it made her strong. Now, faced with being alone again, she knew it was the only thing that had ever truly terrified her. She crawled over to him. She smoothed the damp hair back from his forehead. "Don't you die," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare leave me. You can't. You hear me, Cross? You're not allowed to die. You're all I have." She begged. She cursed. She made promises to a God she didn't believe in. She sat for 2 days and 2 nights. She left only to get water from the horses' canteens, sipping just enough to keep her own mouth from cracking, saving the rest for him. The horses, loyal, stayed nearby. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. He woke. His eyes were clear. He was skeletal, his face hollowed out. But he was looking at her. He saw the tear tracks in the dust on her cheeks. He saw the desperation in her eyes. He had been lost in the fever, but her voice, her begging, had been a rope in the dark. He had heard her. He tried to speak. His voice was a bare whisper. He lifted his hand, his fingers brushing her cheek. "You've tamed me now," he murmured. the words so soft she barely heard them. He smiled, a faint, weak curving of his lips. Mi corazón, my heart. She flinched. The words, the name, they were more intimate than his touch, more searing than his kiss. She had been stripped bare, her terror and her need laid out for him to see. Her walls, the ones she had spent a lifetime building, were gone, and it terrified her. "Don't say that," she whispered, snatching her face away. "Don't!" He just looked at her, his eyes knowing, and then he fell back into a healing sleep. He healed slowly. It took another week before he could even stand, leaning on her. His leg was scarred, his muscles wasted. But he was alive. They finished the last of the jerky. The horses were gaunt. "I know a place," she said, her voice hard, the old toughness a shield she was rebuilding. "South, across the river. A man named Anselmo. He knew my mother. He'll help us." It was another 3 days of slow, agonizing travel. She had to lift him onto his horse. She rode beside him, her hand on his back, holding him steady when he swayed. They reached the Rio Grande, a wide, muddy snake in the desert. Anselmo was still there, in the tiny, forgotten village of San Elizario. He was an old man now, blind in one eye, his face a map of sun and time. He ran a small, dusty cantina that smelled of tequila and limes. He looked at Izzy, his one good eye narrowing. He saw her short hair, her pants, the gun on her hip. "Dios," he whispered, crossing himself. "You are her. You are Carlotta's girl. But you have a fire she lost." "Anselmo," Izzy said, "we need help. We're in trouble." Anselmo looked past her, at Cross, who was slumped against the doorframe, pale and sick. He saw the half-Apache face, the gun belt, the way he still watched the street, even near collapse. "This is the kind of trouble she always brought," he muttered. But he opened the door. "Bring him in. Bring him in." He gave them a room in the back, a small, clean, whitewashed cell with a real bed and a crucifix on the wall. He brought them goat stew and fresh tortillas. He brought tequila for Izzy and cool water for Cross. "Bounty hunters?" he asked. "Yes," Izzy said. "And you killed one," he stated. It wasn't a question. "He did." She nodded at Cross. "Worse, a half-breed killing a white man for a Mexican girl. They will not stop at the river." Anselmo sighed. "You can stay here, a week, no more. Rest. I will find you papers." They stayed for 1 week. It was the first time in Izzy's life she had ever felt safe. The village was quiet. The people were poor, but they smiled. The sun was warm, not cruel. Children played in the dirt street. No one looked at her with contempt. No one looked at Cross with fear. They were just 2 more faces. Anselmo was as good as his word. He brought them papers. "Señor y Señora Perez, you are from Durango, looking for work. It's not much, but it's a name." He gave them a small bag of coins. "From your mother. She left it for you, in case you ever came." Izzy's hands trembled as she took the money. "Rest," Anselmo told them. "Tonight is the festival of San Juan. The village will be alive. Forget the gringos for 1 night. Be young." Cross was stronger. The color had returned to his face. He was walking, his limp almost gone. He watched Izzy as she looked at her reflection in a cracked piece of mirror. She was still in her dusty, torn trousers, her hair ragged. That afternoon, he went out. He came back with a package. He didn't say anything. He just handed it to her. Inside was a dress. It was not a fancy dress. It was simple cotton, but it was a deep, vibrant red. The color of blood. The color of a desert sunset. She stared at it, her throat tight. That night, the village square was transformed. Lanterns were strung between the adobe buildings. A guitar and a fiddle played music that was fast and joyful. The air smelled of roasting corn and sweet tamales. Izzy came out of their room. She was wearing the dress. It fit as if it were made for her. With her dark, short hair and the red dress, she was stunning. She looked like a flame. Cross was waiting. He was wearing a clean shirt Anselmo had given him. He was shaved. He looked at her, and his face, usually so guarded, was filled with a quiet, profound awe. He held out his hand. She took it. He led her into the square. They danced. At first, she was stiff, awkward. She had never danced. Her mother had danced in saloons, for men, for money. But Cross was patient. He held her, his hand firm on her back, and led her through the steps. The music, the lights, the safety, it all washed over her. She relaxed. She tilted her head back, and she smiled. It was not a grin. It was not a smirk. It was a real, unguarded, joyful smile. A smile she had not known she possessed. Cross watched her, and his heart, a thing he had long thought dead, felt full to bursting. They danced for hours. They drank the warm, sweet wine. They were just a man and a woman, in a village in Mexico. They were Señor y Señora Perez, and for one night, it was not a lie. Later, they walked back to their small room. The music was a faint, happy echo. The single candle on the table cast a warm, flickering light. They were both still, flushed with the wine and the music, the spell of the night still on them. The tension was back, but it was not the desperate, taut wire of the ranch. It was a deep, slow, aching tenderness. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. She did not pull away. He kissed her. It was not the rough, desperate collision of their first night. It was slow. It was reverent. He kissed her as if he were drinking water after a lifetime of thirst. She kissed him back, her hands moving from his chest up to his shoulders, pulling him closer. They made love. It was slow and quiet and deep. It was not about heat or need or proving a point. It was a complete and total surrender. It was two halves, two broken, lonely halves, finally becoming whole. It was not a fight. It was a healing. Afterward, they lay in the dark, the candle guttering, their bodies still tangled together. She was lying with her head on his chest, her ear over his heart. He was quiet for a long time, his hand stroking her short, soft hair. "I've never said it to anyone," he whispered into the darkness. "Not to my mother, not to my father." Izzy tensed. She knew what was coming. She wanted to hear it, and she was terrified of it. "I love you, Isadora," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he had never dared to name. "I love you." The words hit her like a blow. She squeezed her eyes shut. It was too much, too real. To name it was to make it something that could be taken away. To say it back was to admit she was chained, tamed, lost. "Don't," she whispered, her voice choked. "Don't start now." She tried to pull away, but he held her fast. "It's all right," he said. "You don't have to say it." She turned her head, and in the last flickering light of the candle, he saw her face. Her eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't have to say it. Her eyes said everything. The morning light felt harsh. The peace was broken by a knock. It was Anselmo. His face was grim. "You must go," he said, his voice low. "I have word. A young vaquero just rode in from the north. He saw them, 3 gringo bounty hunters. They crossed the river at El Paso. They are asking about a half-breed girl and an Apache man. They are offering gold. They are coming this way." Izzy's blood ran cold. The red dress felt like a costume. She was back in her skin. The hunted feral thing. "We have to go," she said, her voice flat. "Deeper, into the mountains. Now!" She began to throw their meager things into the saddlebags. Cross stood by the window, watching the empty street. He was strapping his gun belt on. "No," he said. She froze. "What? Cross, did you hear him? They're coming." "I heard him. We're not running." "What are you talking about? We'll be trapped. They'll hang us both in the square." "They will never stop," he said. His voice was not the quiet, solitary voice of the canyon. It was hard. It was the voice of a man who had made a decision. "We run. They will follow. We will spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. You will. I won't live like that. And I won't let you. There is no other way," she cried, her terror turning to anger. "What else is there? We go back?" They won't ever see us as worth saving. We're just a breed and a half-blood killer. They'll laugh while they adjust the rope." He turned from the window. He walked to her. He put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look at him, to see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "We go back," he said, his voice low and intense. "We go back to that town. We don't go back for revenge. We go back to clear your name." "That's insane. You'll be killed before you even get there." "I'll be hanged." "No, because we won't let them. You told me that man, Brandt, deserved to die. I believe you. Now, we make them believe it." He held her gaze, his grip tightening. "This is the only way we're ever free. We stop running, and we fight. We show them what justice really means." They crossed the Rio Grande at night, two ghosts slipping back into a country that wanted them dead. The paper from Anselmo, identifying them as Señor y Señora Perez, felt thin and useless, a lie that would be seen through in an instant. They rode north, avoiding El Paso, sticking to the old, forgotten trails that Cross knew from his time in the high desert. They didn't ride into the border town. They couldn't. It was a trap, a hornet's nest. They made a cold camp miles out, in a rocky defile that gave them a clear view of the wagon road but kept them hidden. "You wait here," Cross said. He was still weak, the snake venom having left a permanent ache in his leg, but his will was iron. "No," Izzy said. "We go together. They are looking for a half-breed girl and an Apache man. They are not looking for one Apache man alone. I'll be in and out before sunrise. I know who to find." She hated it. It felt like waiting for a trap to spring, but she saw the logic in it. She was the fuse. He was just a shadow. "If you are not back by noon, I am coming in." He nodded, a brief, sharp dip of his chin. He took her bay mare, leaving his own roan, which was still favoring its leg, and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. He found the man he was looking for in a lean-to shack behind the tannery, a place that reeked of chemicals and curing hides. The man's name was Eli Phipps. He had been a scout for the cavalry, a man who saw everything and said little, until he saw too much and was drummed out, a scapegoat for an officer's mistake. Cross had found him in the desert, half dead from thirst, and given him water, a life debt. Cross slipped inside the shack without a sound. Phipps was awake instantly, a long-bladed knife in his hand. "Easy, Eli," Cross said, his voice a low rumble. Phipps squinted in the dark. "Lone Tree? I'll be damned. I heard you was dead, burned up in your own cabin." "They missed," Cross said. "I'm here to call that marker in." Phipps's face soured. A life debt was a heavy thing. "What is it? You need horses? A gun?" "I need information. The girl, the one they say murdered Silas Brandt." Phipps spat on the dirt floor. "The Moreno girl. You're tied up with her? That's bad paper. Cross, they want her bad. The mayor himself, Gideon Shaw, has put up another $200, on top of the Brandt family money. I need to know why." Cross said, "Why is the mayor so interested in a dead rancher?" "Brandt was more than a rancher," Phipps said, his voice dropping. "He was Shaw's muscle, his partner. They've been running stolen cattle up from Mexico for 2 years, rebranding them at Brandt's ranch and selling them to the army. Shaw gets rich, and Brandt gets protection." The pieces clicked into place, the false accusation, the instant mob. It wasn't just prejudice. It was a cover-up. "Brandt," Cross said. "Is that his real name?" "Far as I know." "Why?" "Find out. I need proof. Something from another state. A wanted poster. A telegraph. You were a scout. You know the marshals. You know how to ask. I need proof that Brandt was a wanted man before Izzy shot him." Phipps looked at him, his eyes sharp. He saw the desperation, but also the iron. "That's a tall order. That's asking me to put my neck in Shaw's noose. He owns the sheriff, controls the telegraph." "You're a dead man if I don't help you," Cross said, repeating the words Phipps had said to him years ago. "I gave you your life. Eli, I'm asking for it back." Phipps was silent for a long time. "All right. It'll take a day, maybe 2. The telegraph lines to Texas are slow. Stay out of sight. Shaw's got men everywhere. Brant's old crew, they're jumpy. Cross slipped back out of town, the first hint of gray light on his back. He and Izzy waited for 2 days. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. It was worse than the running, worse than the thirst. It was the sitting still, the not knowing. They shared their silence. The bond between them now a thing of such solid, unspoken trust that it was its own language. On the third night, Phipps came to their camp. He was moving fast, like a ghost. "You were right," he said, not wasting time. He was breathing hard. He handed Cross a piece of paper. It was a fresh flimsy from the telegraph office. Silas Brant, Phipps said, also known as Silas Butcher Brant, wanted in Texas, murder, cattle rustling, train robbery. There's a $1,000 reward on his head, dead or alive. Izzy stared at the paper. $1,000. She had been hunted for $500, for killing a man worth twice that. "How did you get this?" Cross asked. "The night operator owes me money from poker. I told him I was checking on a rumor for a dime novel writer. He believed me. He also told me something else. The original wanted poster. It came through here 6 months ago. The operator gave it to Sheriff Brody like he's supposed to. Brody took it straight to Mayor Shaw. It never got posted." "So they knew," Izzy whispered. Her voice was shaking, but it was not with fear. It was with a rage so cold and pure it burned. They all knew. The sheriff, the mayor. They let him walk around. They tried to hang me to protect him. Cross looked at her. He saw the desire for vengeance in her eyes, a fire that was threatening to burn her alive. He wanted freedom, but he knew, looking at her, that her freedom required something more. It required a reckoning. "We have a plan," Cross said, looking at Phipps. "But we need the town to see it. We need them all in one place." "That's easy." Phipps said, "Tomorrow night, the Dusty Ace. Shaw is holding a meeting, buying drinks for everyone, announcing he's running for territorial legislature. The whole town will be there." "The Dusty Ace," Izzy said, the name like poison on her tongue. "The place my mother died." "We'll be there," Cross said. The next day, they rode into town, not as shadows. As Senor y Senora Perez, they rode down the main street, their heads high. The whispers started immediately. A man on the boardwalk stopped, his eyes going wide. That's the Apache Lone Tree." "And the girl," his companion muttered. "The Moreno bitch, she cut her hair. But that's her." Men stopped their work. Women pulled their children inside. The air, which had been bustling with midday commerce, went dead quiet. All they could hear was the slow, steady clop-clop of their horses' hooves in the thick dust. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was inside, visible through the window, his feet up on his desk. Izzy and Cross dismounted. Brody saw them. His feet hit the floor. He came to the door, his hand on his gun, his face pale and sweaty. What do you think you're doing? You're wanted, both of you." "We're here to talk to the mayor," Cross said, his voice calm, carrying in the silence. "The mayor's a busy man. You're under arrest." Brody pulled his pistol. "Are you arresting me for killing Silas Brant?" Izzy asked, her voice clear, sharp as glass. "Or are you arresting me for killing a wanted murderer that you and the mayor were protecting?" Brody's face went from pale to ashen. I don't know what you're talking about." "We have the proof, Sheriff," Cross said. "The telegraph from the U.S., Marshal in Texas. You're harboring a fugitive. Sheriff, that's a federal crime." Brody's hand was shaking. He looked past them, up the street. Brant's men, 4 of them, were slowly walking toward them, their hands on their holsters. "You should have stayed gone," Brody whispered. "You're dead." "We'll be at the saloon tonight," Izzy said, ignoring the approaching men. "At the mayor's meeting. We're going to tell everyone the truth. You and him, you're finished." She turned, her back to the sheriff, a move of such profound contempt that he flinched. Cross turned with her. They walked to their horses. Brant's men had fanned out, blocking the street. That's far enough. Breed, one of them snarled. Cross didn't look at him. He put his foot in the stirrup. Our fight isn't with you, it's with Shaw. Our fight is with anyone who messes with the mayor's business, the man said. He drew his gun. He's right, Izzy said, her hand a blur. Her pistol was out, aimed, cocked. But our business is with him, not with you. Not yet. The man hesitated. He had seen her draw. He had heard the stories. He looked at Cross, who was now in the saddle, his rifle in his hands, its muzzle pointed at the street. Tonight, Cross said. At the saloon. They rode out, the men parting to let them pass. The tension in the street was a living thing, a coiled snake. They waited in the hills, watching the sun set. Izzy was cleaning her pistol, her movements short, angry. This is for my mother, she said, her voice low. Brant was just one. They're all the same. Shaw, Brody, the men who held the rope. They're all the same. Izzy, Cross said. This isn't about revenge. This is about the paper. The truth. The truth is that they killed her, she snapped. They let men like Brant kill women like her, and they call us the animals. I want him to pay. I want them all to pay. He saw it then. The wildness, the untamed thing that the rope, the desert, and his love had not touched. He had come for justice. She had come for a reckoning. That night, the dusty ace was packed. The saloon was loud, the air thick with smoke and the smell of free whiskey. Mayor Gideon Shaw was at the bar, a big, hardy man with a gold watch chain and a false smile, slapping backs, buying rounds. The bat-wing doors swung open. The saloon went quiet. Izzy and Cross stood in the doorway. Izzy was not wearing the red dress. She was in her trousers, her gun belt strapped high, her face pale and set. Cross was beside her, his long duster failing to hide the rifle he held at his side. Well, now, Mayor Shaw boomed, his smile not faltering. Sheriff, looks like our fugitive problem has solved itself. Arrest them. Sheriff Brody, standing near the back, made no move. He was trapped. We're not here to be arrested, Mayor, Izzy said. Her voice cut through the room. We're here to talk about Silas Brant. The name dropped into the silence like a stone. The men from Brant's crew, the same four from the street, tensed, their hands going to their guns. What about him? Shaw said, his eyes narrowing. A good man, a rancher, murdered in cold blood by this half-breed whore. He was a wanted murderer, Cross said, his voice a low counterpoint to Izzy's. Silas Butcher Brant, wanted in Texas, $1,000 reward. A gasp went through the room. Men looked at each other. That is a lie, Shaw roared. A desperate lie from a killer. Is it? Izzy said. She walked forward, into the center of the room. She was looking at the bartender, the same one who had yelled, "Murder!" You were there. You were his friend. You knew. You all knew. She's crazy, the bartender yelled. And you, Sheriff, Cross said, his voice pinning Brody to the wall. You knew. You got the wanted poster 6 months ago. You took it to him. You buried it. Prove it, Shaw snarled. The telegraph. Cross said, from the U.S. Marshal in El Paso. The proof is coming. It's already been sent. Shaw's face changed. The false hardiness was gone. He looked at the men from Brant's crew. They don't leave this room. The final confrontation exploded. It was not a clean fight. It was a brawl. One of Brant's men drew his gun. Cross fired the rifle from his hip. The man was thrown back against the bar, his shot going into the ceiling. The room erupted. Men screamed, diving for cover. Glasses shattered. Izzy drew her pistol and fired at the man closest to her, the one who had spit on her at the poker game. She hit him in the arm. Get them, Shaw yelled, diving behind the thick oak bar. Gunfire filled the dark, smoky room. It was chaos. Cross grabbed Izzy, pulling her down behind an overturned card table. Bullets splintered the wood above their heads. They're trying to kill us, Izzy yelled. They're trying to silence us, Cross yelled back. A new smell cut through the gun smoke. Kerosene. The back door, Shaw shouted to his men. Burn them out! They're setting a fire! Izzy screamed, her eyes wide with a new terror. It was the ranch, all over again. Smoke, thick and black, began to pour in from the back room. The flames caught the dry wooden walls with a roar. "The window!" Cross yelled. He pushed her toward the front window, the one that looked out onto the street. The saloon was an inferno. The crowd had poured out the front doors, and were now a mass of pale, horrified faces in the street, lit by the growing fire. Cross kicked the card table away. Giving them cover, he fired his rifle, twice, at the men near the bar, forcing them to duck. "Go, Izzy, go!" Izzy ran for the window. She was almost there when one of Brant's men, his face blackened with soot, rose up from the smoke. He had his gun leveled at her back. "Izzy!" Cross threw himself at her. He shoved her, hard, sending her crashing through the window's frame, out onto the boardwalk, in a shower of glass. At the same instant, the man's gun fired. Cross took the bullet. It hit him high in the back, spinning him around. He fell to his knees, his rifle clattering to the floor. Izzy landed hard on the wood of the boardwalk. She heard the shot. She heard him fall. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the cuts on her hands and face. "Cross!" She turned back to the burning building. He was on his knees, trying to crawl, his face a mask of agony. She ran back into the fire. "No!" she screamed. She grabbed him under the arms, pulling him, dragging him, her strength born of pure, animal terror. "You're not dying. You're not leaving me. Don't you die!" She dragged him out of the inferno, collapsing onto the boardwalk just as the roof of the saloon caved in with a sound like a dragon's roar. The entire town was there. They were silent, their faces lit by the massive fire. Mayor Shaw and Sheriff Brody stumbled out of the side door, coughing, their faces black. Izzy was on her knees, her hands pressing against the bloody hole in Cross's back. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow, wet. "He's dying," she whispered. And then she looked up. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, her eyes burning with a grief so profound it was terrifying. She raised her pistol. She aimed it at Mayor Shaw. "You," she hissed. "You killed him." "It's over, girl," Shaw said, trying to regain his composure, brushing the soot from his suit. "You're done. You're a murderer." "He's right." A new voice. "Eli Phipps." He stepped out of the crowd. He was not holding a telegraph. He was holding the original. Creased. 6-month-old wanted poster. "She's a murderer. She murdered a wanted fugitive that this man and Sheriff Brody were protecting." He held up the poster for the crowd to see. "Silas Butcher Brandt, wanted in Texas, $1,000 reward, and our mayor here buried it, so he could get rich off stolen cattle." The crowd surged, a low, angry murmur turning into a roar. "That's a lie," Shaw yelled. His face panicked. "Is it?" a young man said. He was wearing a deputy's star. Izzy hadn't even noticed him. He was young, clean-shaven, and his face was white with shame. He had been standing beside Brody, and he had heard everything. Deputy Evans walked forward, his own gun drawn. He did not point it at Izzy. He pointed it at the mayor. "I don't think it is, sir," Evans said, his voice shaking but clear. "I've seen the ledgers. I never understood. Until now. It's over." He turned to the silent, ashamed Sheriff Brody. "Give me your badge, Sheriff." Brody, his face slack, unpinned his star and handed it over. Evans pinned it to his own chest. He looked at the crowd. "Mayor Shaw is under arrest for harboring a fugitive, for conspiracy, for the murder of those men in the fire." Then he looked at Izzy. She was still on her knees, her gun hand having dropped, her full attention on Cross, who was barely breathing. The young deputy's face softened. He knelt. "Not too close. Ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. "Senora Perez, the shooting of Silas Brandt, it was self-defense. It was more than that. You did this town a service. As far as the law in this town is concerned, your name is cleared. You're free." Izzy didn't look up. She didn't hear him. The words meant nothing. The town, the fire, the law. It was all just noise. She bent her head, pressing her cheek against Cross's back, her hand covered in his blood. He was free. She was free, and he was dying. The world was fire and screaming, and then it was silence. Izzy heard the roar of the flames, the crash of the saloon roof, but it all seemed to be happening miles away. The only real thing in the universe was the man lying in the street, his blood dark and sticky on her hands. "Mom, Senora Perez, you're free." The words were noise. She didn't look up at the young deputy. She was bent over Cross, her ear to his chest, listening to the shallow, wet rasp of his breath. His lung was hit. She knew it. Eli Phipps was suddenly beside her. "We have to move him. He'll die right here." "Where?" she whispered, her voice hollow. "My shack is too small, too close. There's an old line cabin, west of town, 3-4 miles. No one's used it in years." Izzy looked up, her eyes set in a mask of soot, finding the deputy, Evans. "Your town did this. You'll help me." It was not a request. Evans, his new badge heavy on his chest, looked at the crowd, their faces ashamed and fearful in the firelight. He looked at the body of the bounty hunter being dragged from the ashes. He looked at Izzy, who had just saved them all, and at the man who had died for her. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice firm. "We'll help." They got a wagon. They laid Cross in the back, on a pile of blankets. Izzy climbed in with him, cradling his head in her lap. Her hand pressed tight against the wound in his back. The bullet was still in him. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that if they moved him, he would bleed out, and if they didn't, he would die in the street. The ride was an agony. Every jolt, every rock in the road, sent a fresh wave of blood spilling over her hands. She did not speak. She did not cry. She just held him, her will a physical force, a shield against the death that was riding with them. The cabin was 2 rooms, barely standing, the chinking crumbling between the logs. But it had a roof and a hearth. They laid him on the crude bed frame, on a mattress stuffed with old, dry corn husks. "I'll get the doctor," Evans said. "He won't come," Izzy said, her voice flat. "Not for him." "He'll come," Evans said, "or I'll arrest him." The doctor came. He was old, smelled of whiskey, and his hands trembled. He looked at Cross, at his Apache features, and shook his head. "Lungs shot. He's a dead man. I can give him laudanum for the pain. That's all." "Get out," Izzy said. "Ma'am." "Get out," she screamed, her hand flying to her pistol. The doctor and Evans left, leaving her alone with him in the dark, crumbling cabin. For 3 weeks, the world shrank to those 2 rooms. Izzy did not sleep. She did not rest. She was a feral animal guarding its den. Eli Phipps brought them water, food, and bandages. Leaving them on the porch, he brought the laudanum. She used it sparingly, only when the pain made Cross arch his back in a silent, terrible scream. The fever came, as she knew it would. He was on fire, his skin burning, his body slick with a sweat that smelled of sickness and death. He was not in the cabin. He was back in the desert, muttering to his father in Apache. He was at the ranch, calling for his horses. He was in the cave, his voice choked, begging her not to die from the snake bite. She nursed him. She boiled water. She washed his body, her touch clinical, desperate. The wound in his back was a festering, ugly hole. She cleaned it, packing it with the last of the herb poultice he had once made for her. She had no more. She prayed to God she had cursed, offering her own life, her freedom, anything, if he would just breathe. She became a hunter. She took his rifle, the one he had dropped in the fire. She found the skills he had taught her. She set the traps. She was quick, silent. She brought back rabbits, birds, anything she could find. She stewed the meat, forcing the thin, hot broth between his cracked lips. She was hollowed out, a creature of pure, relentless will. On the 22nd day, she was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, watching the gray light of dawn fill the room. He had been still for hours, his breathing so shallow she had to put her hand over his mouth to feel it. She thought he was gone. She was empty. The fight had left her. She had won her freedom. And the cost was everything. Izzy. The voice was not a voice. It was a dry rustle, like dead leaves. Her head snapped up. He was looking at her. His eyes, sunken in his skull, were clear. The fever was gone. She crawled to the bed, her hands shaking so hard she had to grip the wooden frame. You're, she whispered. She couldn't say it. Not dead, he rasped. He tried to smile. It was a grimace of pain. Hurts. I know, she whispered, the tears she had held back for weeks finally spilling, hot and silent. I know. He survived. His recovery was a slow, brutal climb. He was weak, weaker than he had been after the snake bite. The bullet was still in his chest, too deep, too close to his heart for the whiskey-soaked doctor to dare touch it. It would be a part of him forever. He would sit, propped up against the wall, for an hour a day, his face pale and slick with sweat, his jaw set against the pain. Izzy fed him. She held the cup to his lips. She, who had never served anyone, did it without a second thought. One afternoon, the sun was streaming through the one dirty window. He was stronger. He was sitting up on his own. She was sitting in the doorway, mending her torn shirt, the one she had been wearing since the fire. You should go, he said, his voice still rough. She didn't look up from her sewing. Go where? Anywhere. California. The ocean. You're free. Izzy Evans, he told Phipps. The money from Brant's reward, the $1,000. It's yours. He's holding it for you. She pulled the thread tight, her knuckles white. He thinks I'm Senora Perez. He knows who you are. The whole town knows. They're ashamed. They want you gone. They want to forget. Take the money and go live. She tied off the thread, biting it with her teeth. She stood up. She walked over to the bed. She stood looking down at him, at this man who was half a skeleton, this man who had thrown himself in front of a bullet for her. I'm staying, she said. He looked up at her, his dark eyes searching her face. You don't have to. You don't owe me. This was my choice. So is this, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was the most certain she had ever sounded in her life. She put her hand on his chest, her fingers splayed over his heart, feeling the steady, labored beat. I am staying, not because you're hurt, not because I owe you, and not because I'm tamed. She leaned in, her face close to his, her eyes holding his captive. I am staying because I choose you, you and me. This is what I choose. He stared at her, and she saw the walls he kept, the last of his solitude, his defenses, just crumble. He saw her, the wildness, the fire, the rage, and he saw the choice, the one thing no one had ever given her, the one thing she was now giving him. He lifted his hand, his fingers weak, and traced the faded, puckered rope burn on her neck, the scar he had touched at the creek. You were never meant to be tamed, he whispered, his voice thick. But you chained me anyway, mi corazon. They bought a piece of land. They used the reward money. It was not a ranch. It was 160 acres of high, rocky ground, land no one else wanted. It was on the border, but not the one with Mexico. It was on the edge of the Apache territories, a no-man's land, a place between worlds. The white settlers were afraid to come this close to the mountains. And the Apache. Who knew Cross's lineage? Who had heard the story of the man who burned his own ranch and fought a town, left him alone. They were ghosts, living in the space between. They built their life. It was not slow. It was hard. It was real. They had no house. They had to build one. They had no lumber. They cut sod from the dry prairie, making a small, one-room house out of the earth itself. It was dark, and it smelled of dirt and roots, but it was theirs. They bought 2 new horses, a burro, and 6 chickens with the last of the money. Izzy, who had only ever known how to take or destroy, had to learn to build. She made a garden. The ground was like iron. She hacked at it with a dull hoe, her hands blistering, her back aching. The first seeds she planted were scorched by the sun. The second were eaten by rabbits. She sat on the ground, staring at the empty, useless rows, and cried with pure frustration. Cross came and sat beside her. He was still thin, his legs stiff, the bullet in his chest a constant, pulling ache. He didn't say anything. He just picked up a handful of the dry, unforgiving dirt. "My mother, she tried to plant," he said, "back east. She said the ground was black, soft. Here, it's angry." He let the dirt sift through his fingers. "You have to be angrier than the ground, Izzy." So she was. She hauled water, bucket by bucket, from the spring a mile away. She built a small fence of sharp rocks to keep the rabbits out. She worked from sunup to sundown, and in the late fall, she harvested 3 small, gnarled squash, 6 onions, and a handful of beans. She held them in her hands as if they were gold. She, who had only ever brought death, had made life. Cross began to train horses. He could not do the hard ranch work, not yet, but he had his father's gift. He would ride out, find a small band of wild mustangs, and simply wait. He would sit on a rock for days, until they accepted his presence. He learned their language. Izzy watched him with a gray mare, a wild, beautiful thing with fire in her eyes, a horse that reminded her of herself. He never used a rope. He never used a bit. He used his voice, his hands, and a patience that was as vast as the desert. One day, after a month, he simply walked up to the mare and put his hand on her neck. The mare trembled, but she did not run. He was not taming her. He was asking, and she was choosing. Their life was carved out of this hardness. It was a life of small, shared moments. It was the silence of eating their meager dinner of beans and rabbit stew. It was the shared warmth of their bedroll. Now, a permanent bed in the corner of the sod house. It was the quiet understanding that passed between them. The past did not simply disappear. It was a ghost that lived with them. Izzy still had the nightmares. She would wake, not screaming anymore, but in a cold sweat, her body rigid, the feel of the rope on her neck, the smell of Brant's whiskey, the sight of her mother's blood. She would lie there, staring at the sod roof, her heart hammering, her hands clenched into fists. She was terrified that the woman who had shot a man, the woman who had been dragged by a mob, was the only real her, that this new person, the one who gardened, the one who loved, was a lie. In the dark, Cross would find her hand. He would not speak. He would not pull her close. He would just hold her hand. His grip was firm, his palm scarred and warm. He would hold it, a silent, unbreakable anchor, pulling her out of the past, out of the nightmare, and back into the now, back to the sod house, back to him. He would hold it until the shaking stopped, until her fingers uncurled, until her breathing slowed, and then he would hold it until she fell back asleep. One day, in the spring, she came back from checking her traps. The garden was bigger now, the green shoots of corn pushing up in neat rows. She was carrying 2 rabbits, her mind on the stew. She stopped. Cross was sitting outside the cabin, in the shade, his bad leg propped up. He was carving. He had a piece of piñon wood, and he was working on it with his knife. He was not a gifted carver. The work was rough, a little clumsy, but it was strong. She walked closer. It was a cradle, small, solid, and honest. She put the rabbits down, her hands suddenly numb. A cold fear, colder than any nightmare, seized her. A child, to bring a child into this world, with her blood, with his. A child to be spat on, to be hunted, to be called half-breed. A child whose mother was a killer. "Cross," she said. Her voice was strained. He looked up, his face calm. He had been expecting this. "You sure we're ready?" she whispered, the question tearing out of her. "Are you sure I'm ready? What if I'm like her? What if I'm poison?" He put the knife down. He looked at her, his dark eyes seeing all the fear, all the broken pieces she still held inside. He didn't try to soothe her. He didn't give her an easy answer. He just tapped his own chest, where the bullet lay. "I've been ready," he said, his voice quiet, but absolute. "I've been ready since the day you didn't let me die in that cave." He was not afraid of her. He was not afraid of her past, or her blood. He knew who she was. She was the woman who had sucked the poison from his leg, the woman who had refused to let him go, the woman who had chosen. She looked at him, at the cradle, at the small, defiant rows of corn. She looked at the life they had built, with their bare, scarred hands. He was right. She was not her mother. She was not the girl in the alley. She was the woman who built, and who healed, and who loved. She walked over and sat beside him. She picked up a piece of sandpaper he had bought and began to smooth the rough edges of the wood. The final scene is this. It is years later. The light is the deep, burnt orange of a high desert evening. They are riding, not on the old, scarred horses of their escape, but on two strong, beautiful mustangs, the ones he trained. They are riding up to the ridge, the one where he first told her he was free. The sod house is below them, bigger now, with a real porch. There is a small field of corn, and the smoke from their chimney is a thin, blue line against the sky. Izzy's hair is long again, braided down her back. The leather bracelet, woven with horsehair, is still on her ankle. Cross's limp is permanent, but he sits tall in the saddle. They are not young. Their faces are lined by the sun and the wind. They are scarred. They are real. They stop at the top, looking out at the vast, empty, beautiful land. It is their land. Cross leans over. He does not reach for her. He just looks at her. She looks at him. There are no reins in their hands. The horses stand, quiet, trusting, their reins looped on the saddle horns. There is no fear. They sit, side by side, two halves of a whole, watching the sun go down. Their hearts, once wild and broken, now chained together, not by rope or law, but by choice. Thank you so much for listening to our story. No man could tame me. We truly hope you enjoyed it. My name is From Wild West, and I love bringing these tales of the old frontier to life. We would be so grateful if you would let us know where in the world you're listening from. Please, leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more original love stories and adventures. And finally, we'd love to hear your thoughts on Izzy and Cross's journey, so please share them in the comments in English. Thank you again for your time. We'll see you in the next story.